Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to another installment of the NTC podcast. This is episode 96, brought to you by Sports Business Classroom. Aaron Washington here. Glad to be back with you guys as your host. Avi Tyagi is with me this week, and he is joining me to discuss all-stars, starters, reserves. It's going to be a tough one because there's a lot of players out there that are playing at an all-star level. Unfortunately, there are only 24 spots to go around between the two conferences. So that means there are going to be some guys that miss out. And baked into all this is a couple of other subcategories here that we want to discuss. A little bit about a 65 game marker. You may have heard of it. It's a big debate in the NBA world right now. And a couple other little smaller topics we're going to hit. So Avi, hope you are not dreading this too much. It's going to be a difficult run, especially as we get to the West. But it should be a fun discussion, just talking about guys that are playing phenomenally, man. We had a long road to get here, talking about the Pistons, talking about all those like just dreadful teams and things like that. So this is a good podcast, man. This is a good problem to have, trying to sort through all these guys playing at such a high level.
It's award season, so I'm freshly shaven, and not freshly shaven, but recently shaven. And yeah, I mean, after dredging through all the muck, it's nice to come out the other side and be ready to award players on good teams. Getting to watch good players on good teams, it's a much more fruitful experience. But yeah, I'm still dreading it because 12 players in the West is
insane, man. We talked about this before we went on. Basically, this problem has arisen in the West specifically just because everybody's playing. You don't see PG missing 15 games so far. You don't see Kawhi missing 15, 20 games. You don't even see AD missing games right now. So that means KD as well. So all these guys are in the mix.
Jamal Murray back and healthy.
Murray, he's back. Yep. So
I'm glad that we have this difficult choice because it means the level of play in the league is some of the best we've ever gotten.
Oh yeah.
You might even be able to look at it historically. The race for just to be an all-star, what constitutes a star in the league? There's never been as many as there are right now. Mm-hmm. So it's wonderful, but it makes the all-star discussion very difficult.
For sure. We're going to get into a few honorable mentions here later on as we narrow down our list, and then we're going to get into a few names that are honestly worthy, but they may not make the cut tomorrow as of this recording. We're still waiting on reserves to be announced, but as of today, we have not heard that. So these are our picks. These are our opinions, and then we'll see how it matches up tomorrow when we get the official news on the TNT broadcast. Before we get into all the players here, Avi, I do want to ask you, though, about the format of this year's game. As we all know by now, the 73rd installment of the NBA All-Star Game will be the traditional East versus West format. In years past, it was a little bit different. We had the draft, which was not televised, and then it was televised, and it was a cool exercise. But there's something about All-Star going back to its roots, the purest form of the All-Star Game, East versus West. We still have the captains, but it's by conference now, and there's no more Elam ending where we had the point total point score you have to reach. Straight up 12-minute quarters, 4 12-minute quarters. So I like the traditional feel of it. But what say you, Avi? What are your opinions on that?
I do like the fact that based off of players' input, they're treating it more like a game and less like a concert, a musical, whatever you want to call it. So I like that aspect of it. In terms of East-West, I mean, sure, I don't know how much that's going to end up changing. I will say I do miss some of the moments we did get from players getting to choose their teammates, such as when Kevin Durant didn't want to pick Harden. Some of those iconic moments, we're not going to get those anymore, so I'm a little down about that. But, it is what it is. They're going to keep tinkering until they find something, if they find something.
Right. That's just how the league is right now. There's some testing going on. There's some trial and error, and some things work, some things don't. But I'm just glad that they're willing to try different ideas, and they're not just kind of rooted in one strategy from year to year. So I will respect that. What we also have to respect, Avi, is the fact that so many players, like we said before, are playing so well. That's going to bring us to the starters, and we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on the starters because these guys, honestly, like their play, it speaks for itself. There's not a whole lot to debate on this. The starters were announced last week. So for the starters, Damian Lillard did make it as a starter this year. I felt like in my ballot, and if I were to make a vote, he was going to be a reserve for me.
Me too.
And I'm glad we're in agreement. I guess we don't feel that his level of play has been up to par compared to what we've seen in years past. all the numbers are a little bit down. Yes, circumstances. You do have the ongoing relationship between him and Giannis and those other guys. It's making it challenging, but yeah, his play has been a little bit erratic. So I didn't have him as a starter. Still an all-star though, still playing at a very high level. But Brunson for me was a starter, and I just think he's been playing phenomenally with numbers of 26, almost 4 rebounds, 6.5 assists. Similar efficiency marks to last season with even more usage, more shots per game. He had a 50-point game versus the Suns, where he was 9 for 9 on threes, 92% true shooting, and he has the Knicks on a 8-game winning streak at 31-17, without major pieces like Randall, Mitchell Robinson, missing a lot of games here so far. So do want to give kudos to Brunson and the Knicks. I think he's a starter. He's been phenomenal. Halliburton, another obvious pick for this spot. 23, 4, and 12.5 assists are his marks right there. 49 from the field, 39, 86 are the shooting marks. So this is his, whatever season in the league this is, fourth or fifth season. Every season he shot over 40%, 40 or more percent. And this season he's just a little bit below. But the amount of threes he takes, he's just incredibly efficient. He's just almost one of a kind there. Multiple games with 20 assists, 0 turnovers. Just like I said before, incredibly efficient. But the problem for him, Avi, and this is where we can discuss this a little bit, is the 65 game cutoff. He is getting dangerously close to hitting that limit. He only has a few games left. So he's played 35 games to this point. There's only 33 games left. So he has to play 30 of the 33 remaining games on their schedule, if I've done the math right. So that doesn't leave him a lot of margin for error. So it's really a shame that a guy playing at that level is having to deal with an arbitrary cutoff like that. It's one of the side effects. I think when you introduce a strategy like this, you're going to have unintended consequences. And with him and Embiid, that's the situation they find themselves in. You've missed games. They're not being rested. It's just legitimate injuries. With Halliburton, it's been the hamstring. With Embiid, it's been the knee. So they're just running into those difficulties that's cost them a lot of games. And unfortunately, it might cost them an All-NBA appearance. So I did want to discuss that a little bit, with his situation and then Embiid's. And, Embiid's been a monster, just looking at his numbers. Leading scorer in the league again as a center. Killing the mid-range, 52%. That's the long mid-range, actually. All mid-range shots, 49%. And he only has about 5 games left before he is disqualified from the MVP All-NBA discussion. So 65 games. How are we feeling about that cutoff? Is it just a isolated incident, or is this like a bigger problem that the league should just completely try to rectify next season?
I think it's they made a problem out of nothing. They didn't really need to. I think some of it was misinformation and a misunderstanding of how load management worked and why it worked, and a lot of players getting blamed for sitting out, even when it wasn't necessarily by choice. So now I think we've pushed the other way too far. I myself, when I create all NBA teams, I kind of set my own barometer a little bit lower than most people ended up anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time I'd set my barometer at around like 54, 55 games played. If you had that much, that'd be enough for me to start considering you. So 65 to me was already questionable from the start, where that felt much too conservative. And now if we reach a position where Embiid, who is potentially an MVP frontrunner, if he doesn't even get to be on All NBA just because of a few games missed here or there, I think it'll make the entire system look a little bit like a joke, if we're just being honest.
It really is. It becomes a problem when you have league cornerstones be negatively affected by a rule. If it was LeBron, if it was KD, Curry, Giannis, any of these guys run into this problem, it brings the focus in on that problem more than if it was like Julius Randle or somebody like that that's not as high profile. Since it's a high profile player, everyone takes notice. Those players complain about it. And when you have your league cornerstones complain or bring something up to the league, they're going to put eyes on it and say, okay, is this really necessary? I think going forward, one of two things will happen. Either A, the cutoff will be lowered. I was thinking maybe 60 would be a good number. I don't think that's too low. Because I think if he had played 60 games and we didn't have this role and people were putting their ballots out, they would still put him for MVP or All NBA. I don't think missing a few more games would throw him out of the conversation for people. I'm sure it
100%.
wouldn't for you with the way you do it, and you have your own cutoff.
Yeah,
So I don't think that would be a problem. Or maybe they just say like, hey, this was an experiment that worked in some ways, but the negatives outweighed the positives. We're just going to scrap it all together and just go back to how it was, which is what you do. You don't set a set number for everyone. It's a case by case scenario. So maybe if there are two players that are playing at a similar level, and then you're trying to find a tiebreaker, okay, he played 65, player B only played 48, 50. So
yeah,
maybe the guy that played 65 gets the edge over the guy that played 48 or whatever the case may be. So I see one of those two scenarios happening, but yeah, this definitely brings the rule into question just because the blowback and the potential drawbacks of it, even in this first season, are so massive. I think that's where the problem is coming in. Although it does seem to have had an effect on overall participation because we are seeing a record number of players playing a lot of games. Maybe it's hurting them. That's another discussion right there. Guys forcing their way into games. Halliburton did it. Embiid might have done it. That's another problem with it. Guys are just like maybe straining themselves trying to get to that number. So that's
that's my
another
concern.
problem with it.
That's my concern. We still haven't seen the full ramifications of it. Right now, things still look altogether all right. What happens if in the back half of the season, some teams that maybe needed to be resting because they've already secured their spot in the playoffs. They don't have anything. What happens if in game 81 or 82, a star player gets hurt because
Mhm.
they were trying to play for the 65 game rule? Right
Yeah.
now, things look rosy, but
Mhm.
things could turn sour real fast if at the
Quick.
end of the season, some stars are missing the playoffs simply because of this rule and its ramifications on their contract.
Yep.
Halliburton has, I believe, if I remember correctly, $41 million to lose.
Correct.
So
41 mil. Yep.
I
It's a
mean,
lot of money,
I
man.
already never really liked the fact that contracts were determined by the awards and stuff. Like I understood the theory behind it, but now
Sure.
you're relying on voters watching all the teams equally and like paying attention to everyone, which I don't always feel like happens. And I feel like in the past, people use games played or minutes played way too much as a they use it way too extensively in how they're rating players. Like I've seen times where 100 minutes played will make the difference between someone putting one player or the other, rather than actually going and watching and seeing, hey, yeah, this other players maybe played 100 minutes more, but the player who played 100 minutes less has actually probably played better. I don't
Yeah.
think you're overweighting the minutes played too much. So I never
And
really liked the system anyways, but now it's going to look real bad potentially.
oh, for sure. For sure. There's a ton of negatives here that I think are adversely they're going against the players.
Yeah,
So if that's the case, then it might need to be revisited. And we're going to see that starting next season. We're going to see how it works. And like you said, at the end of this season, it's going to determine a lot too. Because if they're in range, they're going to want to push for that because tens of millions of dollars are on the line, even if it costs them their health. So if it does cost them their health going into the playoffs, I think that's another knock against it that can cause it to be heavily revised or just outright discarded. So we'll have to see about that. But just to finish off the teams, the other guys that were selected, Jason Tatum and Giannis were the other guys. Pretty self-explanatory, pretty straightforward. No problems there. They're both having extraordinary seasons. Tatum at 27 points per game, Giannis at 31, 11 boards, 6 assists. I mean, they're beasts. There's not much more to say about that. Those guys are they're starters for a reason, and there's really no debate on that front. Where the debate lies, though, Avi, is in the reserves. So that's going to bring us to our next section. And we're looking at starting with so we have Damian Lillard as reserve. Obviously, we know that he's a starter officially. But from there, I'll just go ahead and name off my team, and then we can see if we differ at all. But I have Julius Randle on my team for reserve. Bam Adebayo next to him. Maxi, Donovan Mitchell, Trey Young, and Jalen Brown make up my seven. So from your reaction, it looks like there's a little bit of a difference. So I would love to hear where we differ when it comes to the reserves.
oh wow. Okay, yeah, we have a lot of differences. So how do you want to do this? We just discuss your picks and then we discuss the differences, or should we just start with the differences?
Let's start with the differences. Who do you have on your team that I did not have in mind?
Well, I would have had Donovan Mitchell as a starter, but I guess since Dame
Okay.
was made a starter, which, by the way, I kind of understand. I feel like that was a legacy one. The fact that he was never voted a starter somehow in the West, which seems crazy to me. I'm not a fan of it, but whatever. No one goes historically and looks into who was a starter and who was a reserve. People just
Yeah,
look at all stars anyways. So
exactly.
whatever. So seeing as Lillard was made a starter, I have Donovan Mitchell, Scotty Barnes, Kristaps Porzingis, Jalen Brunson, Tyrese Maxey, Damian Lillard, Jalen. Oh no, Damian Lillard was a starter. Jalen Brown and Jared Allen.
Okay. Jared Allen is an interesting case. I thought about him because in the last 15 games,
Yes, sir.
incredible run. Incredible run. 24-14, 22-10. Like he's been putting up massive stat lines, and him along with Donovan, who we both have on our teams, they've been major catalysts for a Cavaliers run that's been 14-4 over the last 18 games, been without Evan Mobley
And
and
without Darius
Garland.
Garland.
Yeah,
Yep.
who are both back now, but they had a long stretch without those guys. And many, myself included, were thinking it's over. Like they're going to drop to the play in. They're going to have crazy problems. Like I thought that the current Heat winning streak was something that would happen to them because of the guys they were missing. But because of the efforts of the role players and, just Donovan stepping up and Struz and Isaac Okoro and these guys, Jared Allen, they find themselves right in the thick of home court in the Eastern Conference. So I like the Jared Allen inclusion for sure. Looks like we both have Maxi, so we're in agreement on that one.
Yeah.
Now it gets interesting when we talk about guys like Porzingis is definitely an interesting one. Scotty Barnes. Scotty was another near miss for me because he's been awesome. I actually got the chance to watch him just a few days ago when they played here in Atlanta, and he had an impressive performance. Just crazy two-way talent, I think, is the impression I get from him. Just a guy that can
Yes,
do
sir.
everything. That's what I was telling my friends that were at the game with me. Like, if you need a player that can do literally everything on the basketball court, look no farther than Scotty Barnes. So, I mean, I like that inclusion as well. So, what was the big driver for you when it comes to Porzingis? That's what I'm curious to hear because he has been a little bit in and out of the lineup. He's suffered some random ailments and things like that. So, what put him over the top for you when it comes to including him in your reserve team?
Probably the fact that I didn't refer to games played as much as a tiebreaker as some might. For me, as long as he had played over 900 minutes to the point where I felt like, okay, the samples are starting to stabilize, I I decided at that point I'm going to consider his candidacy. And then offensively, defensively, I just feel like he brings so much to the team. Defensively, he's kind of like their fulcrum. He is the one who is capable of being that premier shot blocker. I love Derek White's secondary contributions, but
Mm-hmm.
Porzingis is the man in the paint. And then the 5-out spacing, he's kind of responsible for Jalen Brown, Derek White, Andrew Holiday having so much room to operate just because of his spacing and the fact that he is a true offensive threat. You can give him the ball, he can pass out of the post. I just think he's had a phenomenal season, and the Celtics have been um, uh, top 10 on both sides of the ball. They've been the best team in the league. I just feel like a lot of that has to do with him. To me, I felt like he's arguably been the second best player on the team. So that's kind of why I had him in, even if he had played fewer minutes than some of the other candidates.
Okay. No, that's very fair. I like that you used minutes as opposed to just straight up games
Yeah.
because I think that's more of an accurate mark when we're looking at player participation. But yeah, I mean, the numbers are great. I mean, 19 points per game, about 7 rebounds. And I think somebody mentioned this. I think it was an Instagram account or maybe it was a YouTube video. I can't remember. But they mentioned how Porzingis, his efficiency on post ups is a career high. I think he's
Yeah.
at about 1.4 points per possession on post ups, which for him is a mark he hasn't hit before. Just being able to punish smaller players because that's typically an area where he struggled earlier on in his career. Where before he got to Boston, it would be like Marcus Smart guarding him in the paint, and he wouldn't be able to take advantage.
He was better at that last year, though. That was another reason when I went back and wrote about him. That was the big jump for me. Is starting
Yeah,
with last year, he's gone much better at being able to pick his spots and uh, attack quickly against mismatches rather than trying to pound his way in.
for sure. I mean, if you're 7-3 and you have a buttery touch like that on your shot, I mean, make him pay.
Let
And
it
he's been
fly.
doing that in a big way. And like you said, I mean, he's been punishing defenses from the outside too. That 5-out spacing is critical. That's why you see times in a game where Jaylen Brown or Tatum will get to the rim and there's no one within 5 feet of them. It's because of all the
Yeah.
spacing. The driving lanes are wide open. So, yeah, I mean, he's not on my team, but I think he's very worthy. And I do like your reasoning as far as why you have him on the team. The efficiency has been great. Those little minor areas where he's improved, the defense, you have to acknowledge the defense. He's still very solid on that end of the floor. And I don't think he gets enough credit, even though he's not a top tier rim protector. I mean, he's still one of the better ones in the league. And he makes a huge difference for a Celtics team that's, once again at the top of the Eastern Conference. So, I mean, that's great contributions there from Porzingis for sure.
Can I ask you about one?
Yeah.
Julius Randle, how? That one was the one that completely threw me off.
Okay, yeah, I can see it. I can see your reaction. That was definitely a surprise. I know he had a rough start to the season. Those first 10 games or so were hideous. Shooting marks were hideous. But he's still a vital piece of a Knicks team that's been, as of today, getting into the top 3, top 4 of the Eastern Conference. He's been a big part of that. The rebounding is still elite. His ability to just get into the paint, and he himself be able to punish matches and make things happen in the inside and around the mid-range area is so very impressive. He's rebounded. I think those first 10 or 12 games, I mean, he had such awful marks from across the floor. Now he's gotten to a point to where, yeah, he's still not the most efficient player, but it's respectable. So you look at his assist numbers, second best of his career at 5 a game. Highest field goal percentage since 18-19 at about 47%. Considering how he started, very good mark for him. Second best free throw percentage of his career. It's about 78%, almost 80%. So just the fact that he's able to, yes, be a better distributor, still be a great scorer for them, be a rebounder, just be a force inside, just being able to just punish defenses and, be a reasonable threat from 3, getting into the low 30s. Again, it's still not an awesome mark.
I wouldn't call him a reasonable threat as a jump shooter. That's probably where I differ the most. I don't think he's had a particularly good jump shooting season. And as great as he is as a rebounder, again, I'm not trying to ambush you, but just that was why it surprised me. Even when I had the list, I hadn't shortlisted him just because when I was watching him, the passing is more prevalent, but the turnovers are also pretty high. And a lot of them are him.
Yeah.
He's still the same Randall. It's just he's being asked to handle more passing responsibilities. That's kind of why sometimes I have a little bit of a. Sometimes when I'm looking at assists, sometimes I feel like it's almost as valuable to then watch what is happening with the turnovers, because sometimes it's just because RJ Barrett left. Some of that is he's being asked to take on an extra offensive load. But when I'm watching him, he's still the same level of decision maker. There's still a lot of mistakes where he's not reading the floor quickly, or he's getting caught with the ball and he's just having to throw something in the air and it's not working as well. And then the other reason I was surprised was because, do you actually like his defense? Again, I'm just genuinely asking. It's really surprising to me.
It comes and goes for sure. He's not the most consistent guy, but I mean, I was watching a decent amount of Knicks games. Probably not in this winning streak as much, but I would say from the first few games all the way up until maybe 10 games ago, I watched them a decent amount. And I saw the difference between the first 10 and then the last 15, 20. There did seem to be a difference with his decision-making, the efficiency. I mean, I think his efficiency went from as bad as it can possibly be all the way up to, and I would say at least average over that span, maybe a little bit above average.
I'd call it a little bit below.
Yeah. That's just based on what I saw. I just saw much better shot making from him, much better decision making, and it just looked like he was able to slow down a little bit, get better looks for his team, and I think that kind of corresponded with the kind of run they've been on. They struggled out the gate, but once he got himself under control, it really made a difference for them.
One other factor I wanted to say, just with the shooting aspect of it, his shooting percentage is higher than before. But to me, that feels a little bit misleading as well, because some of that has to do, I think, with the trades and the fact that Mitchell Robinson got hurt. More of his shots now are coming near the hoop, which is kind of why his shooting percentage is a little bit higher. If you actually look at his true shooting percentage, it's down. And considering the fact that he's not providing much spacing and his jump shooting and pull-up jump shooting are really, really low right now, that's just why. Again, All-Star is tough. It's just that that was the one name you said. Where I don't know if it like triggered a facial reaction out of me, but that's the one where I'm completely shocked.
Yeah, I mean it's going to happen when you have so many players that are worthy of consideration. There's going to be differences, but I mean, I like your case, and we had a few differences there, but there's well, how do you feel about Trey Young? Because that's another name that I've seen some people say yes, some people say no. I just could not leave him off, me personally. Just I know that yeah, he's not everybody's favorite player, but just looking at his raw numbers and his impact for this team, like I just couldn't do it. Like you don't see somebody with his type of scoring prowess and ability to distribute on a nightly basis be left off a team like this. So mid 80s free throw percentage. With the kind of volume and the difficulty of his threes, I think 36 is pretty decent for a 3-point percentage. It's actually the second highest of his career. So for him, that's almost a career mark. He shoots a lot of deep threes. So I mean, just overall, they're high difficulty and just yeah, humongous load for this team, but he does a lot for them. So I just didn't feel right leaving him off. But how do you feel about a guy like that?
I'm fine, honestly. I mean, he was he's my first alternate, really. Like he was one of the last ones I was debating. It was between him, Jalen Brown, and Jared Allen to me, where I was torn. I wasn't sure what to do. I ended up putting Trey Young a little just on the outside, just because with Trey Young, again, so much of it is his shot making is excellent, but his defense is still horrible. He's an excellent passer, but I still think he has a little too much of the ball, and his turnovers are still pretty high, and a lot of that is just because I don't think he's someone who should be supporting that sort of usage. So I could go either way on it. I thought his shooting efficiency was a little bit lower than it's been in years past. I mean, I could go either which way. It To me that becomes a preference of taste if you have him in or not. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't really mind either way. It's just that I thought I had 12 names who I wanted to give the All Star shine to, and then if someone misses, sure, yeah, I'll put Trey Young in. I,
yeah.
I didn't really mind.
Yeah, I get that. I think with the defense front, I don't look at that as much when it comes to All Star. Maybe if we're getting into All NBA and some awards like that, especially if we were doing like an MVP discussion or something like that, then yeah, I would take a closer look at it, or just a straight up ranking of like best players in the league. That's a huge factor for me. But All Star, not as much. I know it's a part of the game, but I'm just looking for some of the most impactful players, and it just leans a lot more towards offense. But there are guys like Jared Allen and Porzingis and Bam Adebayo, that
Yep, that's
impact the
why
floor in a big way on defense. And I think that's a guy that you also had on your team, if I remember correctly. Bam
I
on
had him
the
last year. I had him last year, not this
okay,
year, but I had him last
okay,
year.
gotcha.
But
Yeah, I mean,
again, just because of that, I feel like I tend to lean a little bit more towards defense towards this. I feel like the purpose of All Star, you're probably right, is about seeing like the showmanship. So that's probably why you want to lean more offense in terms of voting. I
yeah,
just end up leaning a little bit more towards defense over the years as I've been doing this, just because I kind of feel bad, maybe a little bit for some of the centers who get overlooked, just because defense is so hard to quantify. It's so hard to look at from a stats perspective. You end up having to watch the game and realize just how impactful they are on that side of the ball. And I feel like they get the short end of the straw. So I mean, I typically have ended up giving some of these votes to defensive players. Like I've had Gobert as an All Star in years past when I feel like maybe other people haven't. So yeah,
okay.
that's probably why. That's probably the difference right there.
I see. Okay, yeah, but I mean, different strategies, but I think they're both valid. They're both important parts of the game. So,
Yeah.
if you weigh more, a little bit more than the other one, I don't have a problem with it. I think it's fair.
And again, I
So,
was going back and forth either way. So I mean,
yeah, yeah, there's definitely some guys
yeah.
that if they miss out, it's not because they aren't worthy. It's just there's not enough space, just plain and simple. But as we move over to the Western Conference, we can take a brief look at the starters here. This was, I think, pretty cut and dry. I think even more than the Eastern Conference was. When you look at who made it, Shea, Luca, LeBron, KD, and Jokic, I didn't have any problem with any of those picks. I think they've both all been phenomenal. I think there was somebody, maybe it was JJ, somebody had a slight difference. I think it was maybe AD instead of Katie or LeBron. I think somebody did that, but even then, I wouldn't be furious about it.
Yeah.
But I mean, KD and LeBron are going to be the starters. Like, I just think there's no way that they're not. And then Shea bursting on the scene here as a top, whatever you want to say, 5, 6, 7 player in this league. I look at his numbers and I continue to be shocked. Just seeing okay, yeah, over 30 points a game. Everybody knows that is pretty straightforward. But the 70% at the rim, that number just breaks my mind every time I think about it. 59.1% from 2-point range. This is a guard. This is a lead guard. This is not Sabonis, Gobert, Anthony Davis. This is a guy that is 6'6", pretty decent size for the one position, but yeah, just incredibly efficient. Can draw fouls at will. Can get into the paint at will. Can punish mismatches. Can shoot a decent percentage from three, and an incredible percentage inside the three. And that's a cool little wrinkle in his game that kind of separates him from other guards. He's not going to launch 8 or 9 threes a game, and like a Trae Young or a Donovan Mitchell or a Curry. He's going to do so much damage inside the paint with his wit, with his agility, with all the moves he has, the footwork. I think it's a cool little wrinkle in his game that just sets him apart from some of those other players. And Luka does a lot of the same things, shooting 37% from three this season, which is not a huge mark, but you got to think about it. He takes 10 threes a game, and I think it's 8.3 of them or so are off the dribble. He only takes 1.9 catch and shoot threes a game. So when you factor that in, 37% is pretty good. A lot of threes, and a lot of them are difficult. So, those two guys, the way they kind of make things happen from inside and out, incredible. And then LeBron and KD, I think everything to say about them has already been said. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Do want to give congrats, though, to LeBron for his 20th straight All-Star game, most in league history. He hasn't missed an All-Star game since 2004. It's a long time. So just want to give some props there. And then Jokic, triple doubles, insane stat lines, has the Nuggets near the top of the West again. I mean, he's doing what he does. So any additional thoughts on the starters that you wanted to put in there?
I mean, they're just all elite. I don't really have anything to say. I mean, Shea for MVP might really happen now if Embiid misses enough time. I feel like he might be a front runner at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Just because, again, going back to what you were saying about the 2-point shooting thing, it's so much different for him to be shooting that percentage versus someone like Sabonis or some of these other centers, because
Mm-hmm.
he's having to create those shots in there when the paint is sometimes still crowded,
Yep.
versus when a lot of these centers end up shooting it once it's they're catching it off the pick and roll. There's less space there, or maybe there's a mismatch. It's almost a completely different sport. Almost, it's like playing 1v2 versus playing one-on-one against a younger sibling. So
Mm-hmm.
what he's doing from all three levels, but especially within the arc, is just remarkable.
It really is.
Yeah.
He's one of a kind. I don't know of another guard that's that efficient from that area of the floor. It,
Yeah.
it really is just mind blowing. So that's pretty straightforward. I think we're kind of in agreement on that one. Here's where the real fun starts. Looking at the reserves. So we had to get to it eventually. Pretty insane here. We're looking at all the names that could be in it. So before we went on, Avi, you were trying to narrow this down from, I think you said 30 to around 20, and then you finally got down to 12 after heartbreaking omissions and
Oh,
cuts. Finally got down to 12. I went through a similar exercise, although I kind of go from the other direction. I kind of start from, okay, who do I have to put on the team? And I just go and I start there, and then I honestly just try to think of the first people that come to mind, and then from there maybe just add on another few and then make some cuts. But either way, insanity. So I'm going to try to name some names that we both have that I think have to be on the team. Let's start with Sabonis, just the kind of season he's having for the Kings here right now. 2013 and 8 on a Kings team. It's been a little bit up and down, but leading the league in rebounds per game. 61 from the field. The free throw percentage is still a question, but just absolute dominance. And you'll see the triple doubles. You'll see the double doubles. Near the top of the league in both of those categories. So I just feel that he was one of my first selections, and I didn't really have any second thoughts about it. Did you have second thoughts about that? Or
I didn't have him, and he wasn't in my last group. There was we'll get to it, but for 3 spots, I had like 6 or 7 names I was picking between, and he wasn't on that list. Like he
Interesting.
was on the next group outside that. He was in a list with like Gobert, Zion, Wemby. Like there was another secondary group of people I finally cut out, and he was in that group. So he was in the group of like I want to say 17 through 21, 22, whatever that list was. He was in that group.
Now I'm in your position. Now I'm surprised. Kind of like you were with me and Randall. Now I'm surprised by that one. So, um, how did he miss the mark for you? What was the kind of determining factors here?
Honestly, mostly defense. Again, I just didn't like his defense that much. It's the same thing as it was the reason I was shocked with Randall is the same reason why you'd be shocked by Sabonis. Because I feel like I ended up leaning more towards the defensive side of the scale, and you end up leaning more offense, which is where the differences arose from.
Mm-hmm.
Also, we didn't cover it earlier. I think you had Jimmy Butler. I just wanted to say I didn't have him, but he was my second alternate, and I totally understand
Yeah,
if someone had him in.
I
So,
didn't have Jimmy Butler either.
oh, you didn't have Jimmy? Well, then
No,
who was
I
the?
had Bam.
Oh, you had
Bam.
Bam. Okay, yeah,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
sure. I can understand that too. He's probably my third man out. So,
Okay. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
That's a little surprising to me. I just think. I mean, he's been just absolutely insane. I know the defense isn't great, but I think he's so dominant on the offensive side of the floor. I mean, his numbers, in a sense, aside from the scoring, the scoring is definitely a little bit weaker, but his other numbers are Jokic level. When you're talking about leads league in rebounds, 8 assists per game, still pretty efficient from the inside the arc. Just the opportunities he creates for that team, he's a catalyst for almost everything they do. So just from that perspective, is how much he impacts the game in every area of the floor from an offensive perspective. I couldn't leave him off. So I guess that's just my reasoning. Let's try another one. Anthony Davis.
yep,
Uh, okay, good.
easy,
I'm like, all right. I'm pretty sure we're in agreement on that one.
yep,
25-12 on the season. He's only missed 3 games so far, and just top tier defense again. So if we're going to the defensive side of the things that you enjoy, he checks all the boxes. So I feel like there's no excuse
absolutely
for him to be left off.
phenomenal,
He does everything.
phenomenal defense once again. I
Yep.
know the Lakers are seated low, so I'm worried he might be one of those guys who ends up only scraping in. But I mean, I think he's had a phenomenal season, and I
Yes.
think
Yeah.
I think laying blame at his feet for the Lakers being where they are would be completely misguided. I think he's been
Yeah.
excellent. So complete
Absolutely.
agreement there.
Yeah. Awesome. I mean, yeah. Just not much else to say. He's just been a force. I'm glad he's been healthy for one of the few times in his career. He hasn't had a lot of seasons where he's played, over 65, hit 70 games. So hopefully he gets there this year. I would love to see him on All NBA and get back to that level of player that we saw in New Orleans. Uh, let's go with Kawhi Leonard. How do you feel about Kawhi Leonard? All good?
Absolutely
All
easy.
good. All right. I love that. 41 games out of 45 total so far for the Clippers. Fun fact, he hasn't played 65 games in a season since 16-17
Yep.
with the Spurs. So that's a long time. And I feel like we might have talked about that in another podcast. But incredible durability. The numbers aren't insane. You're not going to sit here and just like shake your head at the numbers. It's really the efficiency. Because when you think about it, 44 from three, 88, 52 from the field. I mean, like 50, 40, almost 90 is, pretty spectacular. So, and of course, his defense is still pretty stout for the Clippers, and a big reason to why they are top 10 in defensive rating. So I think another component of that just gives them even more credibility on this team. So that's a great one. How about Anthony Edwards? Did he make the cut for you?
See, I was hoping we're gonna end up getting to this. He was part of that group of 5 or 6 where I was having to pick between, and I was hoping I would end up just discussing it with you. So that there was a group of
Did
five
he
or
not make
six who
it?
I was in between, and I was hoping we'd end up having a discussion about him. So actually, maybe it'll just be easier to tell you the other 2 names I had who 100% were in for me, and
Okay.
then I'll tell you the names that I had in my group of 6, and then you can talk me through it as I try to figure out for sure who my last 2 or 3 were.
All
So
right.
the
Let's
other
do
two
it.
names that I had were Steph and Devin Booker, who I had for sure in.
Yep. I'm good on
Yeah.
those. I got both those guys in.
So
Had to do it.
that made 9 for me, and then spots 10 through 12. That's where it got tough. I was going between Chet, Paul George, Jamal Murray. I was looking at Kyrie Irving. I know he won't get in on the real thing. I just think he's had a great season. I understand if
Yeah,
we should just leave him off just because of minutes played, but I just think his
yeah,
season as a whole has been fantastic. So I,
he's been
I had
great
him in the
for
discussion
sure.
as well.
Okay.
Larry Markkinen. I had the same thing with Desmond Bain, although I think he'd probably be on the outside. Same with Fox, who I also had a discussion. I think maybe I'd put those two right on the outskirts, and then
Yeah.
Anthony Edwards.
Okay.
So Paul George, Jamal, Kyrie, Edwards, Larry Markkinen, and Chet. That was the group for me. And
So who ended up making it out of that group on the final ballot?
see when I okay, I had Paul George in, I had Jamal Murray in, and then spot 12. I've been playing dice basically with Chet, Kyrie, and Edwards. At the moment, I think I probably have to swing Edwards just because of how Chet's January has gone, but my heart
Yeah.
still says Chet, so
Mhm.
I don't know.
I like that. Yeah, I think Chet has been a little bit down probably
Yeah,
in the
he has
last
been.
2 weeks. Yeah, struggled a little bit. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that might be enough to kind of slide him just out of that discussion. Um, so for me, here's where I differed a little bit. PG was one of those guys for me that was like right there on the line. I didn't quite have him in, but he's probably my first alternate, kind of like how you did with Trey Young, to where you're kind of like, hey, either way, I'm good. Um, he's like my first guy out, but phenomenal season. He's been great, very deserving. If he gets in, I'm great. I'm cool with it. But I think he is my 13th man at this time. So very close on that one. I honestly didn't really give too much thought to Chet. He's probably in the next 4 to 5 players because I had like Fox, PG, and I think Gobert were like my guys that were like right on the outside. Then I'm kind of thinking about Chet and a few other guys. I actually feel, I know some people will disagree with this, but I have Markkinen on my 12. He's like one of my last guys. He might be 11 or 12 for me.
Totally understand.
Yeah, because I just look at his numbers. I mean, it's tougher this year because of how many people are playing a lot of games. But for Markkinen, I mean, very similar story to last season, except for I think the efficiency is a tick higher in almost every category. But I mean, he made it last year, and he's having an almost carbon copy season. He's still a monster coming off of screens for that Jazz team. He can still make some things happen in the post. Just taking advantage. Just going over either shoulder, getting some rangers up, but just being a weapon at any part of the floor, being able to create his own shot, but a lot of times just kind of run off the screens and just be an elite spot up threat is really what makes him special as well. So, and plus the Jazz themselves have just been a real surprise, and they went on that
Yeah.
crazy run where they shot up the standings. So all that together just kind of, I had to put him in one of those last spots. I think he's probably 12 for me, that last spot, but I had to give it to him just because of the just as efficient, just as deadly as he was last season, and the Jazz have been turning some heads. So had to put him in there. I want to talk about Booker a little bit because he's been on an insane run. So I'm glad that we both have him in there. I was going to, if you had him as one of your last cuts, I had argument ready to
No,
go.
no, I wasn't gonna do that. He's been
Yeah,
phenomenal.
it is crazy. So I read an article this afternoon by Matt Issa. This is from Opta Analyst. If you
Yeah.
guys don't read Matt, he has some great stuff going up. Encourage you to check that out. But he had this in his article. So he's hitting 50% of his mid-range jumpers. That's up from 47 2 years ago, where he won all NBA first team. Improved efficiency around the basket, more adept passer, 9.9 assists per 100 possessions. And their Twitter account had the statement comparing him to Wilt Chamberlain. So over the last 4 road games, he has scored 204 points. So he is the second NBA player in history to score at least 200 points in a span of 4 road games. I know it's a little bit of an arbitrary stat. It's not something you're going to think of automatically, but being on any kind of list with Wilt Chamberlain, I think that's got to count for something. So and not even just that, I know that's like a big stat you can throw out there just to kind of try to make a case for him. but just because he is assuming such a large role for this team as the lead guard, because they don't have that other traditional point that he can play next to, just being able to make great reads. His turnover percentage is not bad. It's actually lower than his career average.
Yeah.
Making better passes. They had some clips of some skip passes to the corner that he's seeing more of more often. Uh, just keeping his teammates involved, but simultaneously being able to go for 40, for 50, being insanely efficient in the mid range, which is important because he takes a lot of them. So I think all those factors together, finishing better around the rim, all those things together just make him such an elite talent in our league that really just puts him in that elite of the elite category, the conversation. So I think all that being said, he's an all-star, just plain and
100%.
simple.
I mean, I feel like this is one of the most underrated things. Even when you look at something like shooting efficiency or true shooting percentage, just one, the difficulty to improve that a little bit on the same sort of reps, unless you've changed how you're using the player, just to be able to make slightly more shots typically means you might have to make some changes to your shot. Some of it is variance, but over a long haul of the course of a season, for a true shooting percentage jump to occur, a lot of times that does mean you're just having to drain more shots from the same positions. And a lot of that is just working on skill, working on footwork, working on timing. And Devin Booker's obviously a master of that. He's improved in that almost every year. And then the fact that he's been able to shoulder that humongous load without them having a true point guard and still maintain that level of efficiency. He's like what, 62% true shooting percentage, which I mean that's incredible considering just the volume, the usage volume he's had, and to maintain a lower turnover rate despite that. I mean, you could. It's pretty easy to make a case he's been the best player on the Suns. I mean, he's been absolutely phenomenal the last month.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just a crazy run he's been on. So I think that kind of solidifies his case
Yeah.
for an all-star appearance. And I think he was probably third for me. I think I had Sabonis Davis, and then I went straight to Booker just because of the type of season he's having. So just absolutely phenomenal.
I'm
So
just, I'm just never gonna. It's gonna take me a while to understand. Yeah, you had Sabonis was really your first guy. Like when you were making the
he
reserve,
was he was one
Sabonis
of
was
my
the first guy,
first
huh?
three guys that I thought of. When I
Wow.
was just start writing off
Okay.
names, he was one of the first guys I thought of. I thought of him before Markkinen, before Curry. Uh,
Wow.
he was just one of the first guys I thought of when I was just putting down names on my list. He's just one of the first that came to mind because I just
Yeah, yeah, I
know
got you. I
he's
got you.
been dominant, and I've watched him quite a bit this season. And just now I keep seeing these box scores, come out where he's like 25, 14, and 10, and things like that. You just typically don't see big men that can do that consistently, not be considered among one of the best in the game. So I felt like I had to put him in there.
Yeah. Huh. What do you think of Jamal Murray?
Jamal, uh, honestly, he was probably also kind of in that second group of alternates. I had him probably
Okay.
after Fox, after Paul George, probably there with like Chet and Gobert. Great season, still, doing some awesome things for the Nuggets. You can still be one of the best scorers on a nightly basis. But I didn't see enough for me to put him with Curry, with Booker, with Kawhi. Like I just didn't. And then also, if you want to factor in defense, which I don't do a lot of times, but I'm sure you do a little bit more than me. He's okay, but I
Yeah.
don't know. He just didn't stand out to me as much as those other players, and he's 100% deserving. But I don't know. I had to make some cuts somewhere, and he was just right there on the outside for me. But he's still been phenomenal, and he's a major part of what the Nuggets do every night.
Yeah, I got you. Again, All Star is difficult. Yeah,
It's so
I
difficult.
don't think his defense is at the level it was before he got hurt. Still, like it's better than it was last year, but it's not. It's not what it was in like 2021. Yeah, the 2021 season. Man,
Hmm.
that's weird to say. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, his defense isn't quite at that level. I like what he's done though from a playmaking perspective this year compared to most. He really feels less like he's a shooting guard on a team with Jokic as a point guard and more like a co-point guard along with Jokic. I've really liked what he's done as a playmaker, as a passer. I feel like in terms of making reads, I like his reads. I feel like he has better chemistry now with Aaron Gordon than he did, which I guess makes sense because now Aaron Gordon's in think this is year 3 on the Nuggets, if I remember correctly.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just feel like there's better chemistry, better synergy. I like his level of passing more than someone like some of these bigs who act as post hubs, I feel like get almost free assists just because of how the NBA counts assists. The fact that okay, what ends up happening is they just pitch it back. The guard is still having to actually create with 2 dribbles and score, and then the big just gets the assist, which feels a
Yeah.
little bit cheaper to me than some of the guard assists. Some guard assists are still just pass it out to the wing and then somebody drives in and scores. But
Yeah.
I feel like on the whole, guards who are creating assists and limiting turnovers, I feel like it's an underrated skill to be able to um not turn the ball over as much. That's something that Cade has struggled with, but something that I think Jamal Murray is excellent with. Just being able to sustain that huge volume of playmaking and self scoring as a pull up shooter without
Hmm.
turning the ball over. So that's kind of why I had him in. But I
Hmm.
mean, All Star's tough. All Star's tough.
We're splitting hairs at this
Yeah.
point. We're getting into the nitty gritty, very fine points of their game that really kind of determine whether they're in or out. That's how close it is. So there's a lot of right answers. I don't think there's hardly any wrong answers when it comes to ballots. I can't wait to see what the final numbers say once we get the total list and we see how it breaks down for everybody and who just missed the cut. That's going to be really interesting because I want to see, who are those first cuts, guys that have every right to be frustrated that they didn't make the team because they're deserving.
How'd you feel about Anthony? How'd you feel about Anthony Edwards' defense? I don't know how much you watched, but just
Yeah.
how much did you feel? What did you feel about that?
So based on what I've watched, and I would say that I haven't watched a ton of Timberwolves this season,
Hmm.
but I still feel like he is capable of being that nightly just lockdown threat, but it doesn't happen as much as I would like it to.
Yeah,
So there are times to where, okay, he's locked in. Let's say it's a big game, it's a big matchup. There's a like he takes the matchup personally, he's fired up. Okay, like we saw it in the playoffs when they played Denver in that first round last year. Locked in, okay, he can guard almost anybody aside from a center. He can chase anybody around the court. He can man up, use his strong body to hang with almost any guard, any wing. And yeah, sometimes it's just kind of like, well, it's not the same effort level. It's not the same attention to detail. So he's not a tier 1 defender for me. I think he can be when he wants to be. But maybe he's closer to somewhere between 2 and 3 uh, on a nightly basis. Just because of it, when you even it out, that's what it comes out to be for me when it comes to him. And yeah, he can still make incredible plays. He can still make chase down blocks. You can, still come from the weak side and deter shots because he has crazy athletic ability. And sometimes his motor is going at that pace. But other times you just kind of want to see more. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
yeah, okay. That's why that last spot was so tough for me. It wouldn't have been so tough if Chet had kept up what he had been doing, but I think Chet um decreasing his scoring output, getting worked a little bit, especially that last Pistons game. Like there have been games recently where I feel like Chet, the rookie wall is finally starting to hit him, which is kind of what opened up that last spot for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then comparing him versus Anthony Edwards, I spent, I don't know, an hour, nah, maybe more than an hour. I spent a good amount of time just individually trying to go back, find clips, watch Timberwolves defense, and watch Anthony Edwards defense. And my takeaways were I'm still not sure what to make of him just because I really love his on ball defense. Like if you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to score on him on ball, just forget about it. He's bigger than you, he's quicker than you, and he takes every on ball attempt as a personal affront. So
Mm-hmm.
you're probably not going to score on him that way.
Yeah.
But then when I watch him off ball, I still feel like, well, it feels like he's still being protected because of how good Gobert's defense has been. Who, by the way, shout out, I wouldn't have him in the All Star. I don't even know if I'd had him in the first group, but in that second group along with Sabonis, I just feel like his defense has been so good. I wanted to give him consideration just for that.
Mm-hmm.
But he also had Jaden McDaniels defending like at an elite level alongside him. So I feel
Yep.
like he is getting protected a little bit. And off
Yes.
ball, I still see him making mistakes. But on ball, he's so good. I wasn't sure how I was going to value that. I think ultimately, just for his scoring exploits and the fact that he's had to assume number one responsibilities as a scorer on the Timberwolves, I'm thinking my mind is telling me maybe I should lean with him on my All Star team,
Mm-hmm.
but my heart still says Chet because of how good that first 30 games of Chet were, just
Yeah.
offensively, defensively. I mean, he you can't ask much more from a rookie than what Chet has given.
Hmm.
Defensively, he is the fulcrum. He's the reason they've been a top five defense over the course of the season.
Yep.
He's the difference between them being closer to middle of the pack last year versus being that elite defense. He's offensively, he's the reason they have the 5-out spacing they do. He opens up so much for even for Shea. Shea's having an MVP season, but that 5-out spacing is being unlocked somewhat by Chet, and it is kind of the difference between
True.
him and players like Randall or Sabonis, where they score, but so much of their scoring is still coming from within the arc and specifically within the paint that it doesn't help teammates as much as players as Porzingis or Chet end up doing
Yeah.
because you can credibly and feasibly space them out there and people have to guard them out there and that spacing allows for their teammates to succeed. It's almost like in a way it's almost like creating playmaking um through passing or through assists or through off-ball movement. That gravity factor itself, I think, does end up making a big difference for that 5 spot. And then
Mhm.
defensively, is he still second in the league in blocks? I can't remember. I think it was something like that. I think he was top 3 in blocks still. Like
Yeah.
I mean, he's just been everything. So I don't know what to do with that last spot. I'm still going to be thinking about that one.
Yeah. Yeah. If it were
I could
me,
move Jamal in there too because of the
sure.
Edwards defense versus Jamal defense thing. Like those are the 3 for me where I'm still I don't know what to do.
Yeah. For me, if it were up to me, I would probably just go with Ant-Man and just Chet. Just I mean, it's been a very small little window to where he struggled, but I think when it's this close between all
Yeah,
these
tight
different
windows.
guys, that might be enough to kind of just knock him out of there. But I mean, he's going to have plenty. He's going to have plenty more
Oh
opportunities in his
yeah,
career.
100%.
He's already so good, and I'm just surprised by how quick he's progressed. When we came into this season, I didn't think he'd be this good this soon, and it's a big reason why the Thunder have been a lot better than expected, a lot faster. So he's done so much for that team. So yeah, he's definitely an all-star consideration. I don't think he'll get in this year, but I mean, he's going to rattle off tons in his career just because of how good he is on both ends of the floor. And he opens up so much, like you said. So, Avi, this has been an awesome discussion. There are even more names we didn't even mention.
Can I
Brandon
quickly go through
Ingram.
some of them? Just to show just how tough the West was, like just quick before we really
Yeah.
wrap this up. Here were those names who I considered and eventually left off, but they're having phenomenal seasons, and I feel bad. And I'm so sorry you're in the West in 2024 rather than in the East in 2016. That's your loss. Timing was bad. I'm sorry, man. James Harden, Victor Wembanyama, Zion Williamson, Fred VanVleet, Rudy Gobert, Jalen Williams, Sabonis, Sangoon, Alperen Sangoon, who we didn't talk
Yeah.
about, CJ
Mm-hmm.
McCollum, Brandon Ingram, Karl Anthony Towns, and then I just wanted to shout out Colin Sexton for having a great year. I wasn't in my All Star thing at all, but he was just having a great year, and I
Young
just
Bull
wanted
has
to
been on
say
a
shout out to
tear,
you, sir.
scoring tear, man. He's been
Yes,
awesome. 100%. That's a lot of names, man. That's a lot
yeah,
of names that are probably not going to, like, a lot of those guys won't make it, but that doesn't mean they're not deserving. It's just the nature of the league. And I guess one last thought we can throw out here is thoughts on expansion of All Star. JJ mentioned it, I want to say approximately 47 times on this podcast about how he's campaigning for the league to
and he's done
expand
that for
rosters.
years. I think he
Yeah,
was saying that like 5, 6 years ago. He was campaigning for that while he was still a player.
maybe. But I mean, with years like this, I would at least like to see them open up, I would say, like another slot in both conferences, if not 2 or 3. There's so much more talent in the league today than there was across the board more than 10, 15 years ago. So, and he mentioned the percentage of players that are all stars compared to years past. Now that we have more roster spots, you have the two ways, those other available
Yeah,
slots, there's more players. So it used to be 20% or 10% of the league would be all stars. Now it's 5%. So the proportion is smaller just because the slots have not changed, the spots available, but the league size and uh, the number of worthy considerations in terms of like the number of players has gone up. So I wanted to throw it out there too. He makes some great points. I agree with him. I would like to see the roster expanded. I don't know about 3 in each conference, but I would say at least a couple more slots because we'll probably have more years like this where you have everybody healthy, and especially in the Western Conference, you're going to have a lot of guys left off. I don't think it would dilute the award. That's why they brought up the
Yeah.
percentages, because some people think it will dilute it. But like, if the percentage, the proportion is the same today as it was in 1994 or whatever, when there were less players, and definitely less players that were on
Playing
this
a heavy set
level,
of minutes, getting that sort of usage. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Then it doesn't really like destroy the case or just make All Star a handout, because it's still a very small percentage of players, and it's the same as it would be 20 or 30 years ago. So put
I'd
that out there.
probably expand it by one, especially with expansion on the horizon. Like there were talks that Adam Silver's new contract extension is partially based on the fact that he's supposed to usher in expansion. So
Mm-hmm.
that seems to indicate that by the time his next deal is finished, we will have 32 teams. So I feel like I'd get a jump start on that now, especially with the level of talent. I understand the reason kind of for keeping it the same, because even if the total number of players who were probably eligible for All Star back then was smaller, those guys were also pioneers. They didn't have the advancements we've had in player development in terms of how coaches indicate players to play. Like, I always think of players like Reggie Miller, who back then were punished because um, just because of the style that existed back then and because of how people viewed players versus now, where we have so much more data on players, we're able to better understand them. Outside of local markets, we can watch players much more than we used to be able to. So I kind of understand the reason why um, it's been limited for so long. But I think now, as we're heading towards expansion, we have more players who are capable of playing like all stars that don't get to showcase their opportunity on ball as much as we used to. Whereas back then, because there were fewer players who were at the caliber where they should be, those one man shows, it was much easier to pick out all stars. Versus now, you'll have these super teams where it's like, well, Paul George is probably the third ball handler on his team, but he's been fantastic in the reps he does get, even though James Harden gets much more of the ball than he does. Same with
Mm-hmm.
Kawhi. So I think with that sort of dilution and the fact that All Stars become much more difficult now for those reasons, I think we could open up an extra spot. And as someone who was struggling between three players for two spots, yes, let's add a new spot right now, please.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Expansion is another reason for that. So if you
Yeah,
get two more teams, I actually would be in favor of even more than one. But for now, I think one would be a good place to start. But all issues that we'll definitely get to and we'll cover on this podcast at a later date. But for now, we're gonna shut it down and we're going to get ready for the formal announcement of reserves tomorrow for us. You guys might already be aware. But it should be fun either way, just to see who makes the cut. So, Avi, thanks again for offering your time to come on. Love the conversation here. I love that a couple of us had some moments of shock with the selections.
the
But
Randall one's gonna stick with me for a while, man. That's gonna stick with me.
yeah, yep, and yeah, it works the same for me, man. On the other end, I think
Absolutely.
yes, a bonus. So it's I guess it's fair in that regard. But we hope you guys enjoyed this episode. We will definitely be back here next week with more clips. So if you guys are looking for clips, you're looking for content, notradeclause.com is going to be the place to find that, as well as Instagram, no trade clause, Twitter, no trade underscore clause. Our YouTube channel, of course, always has stuff going up almost daily. So be sure to check that out. So we're going to sign off, guys. Thanks for joining us on this episode. We hope to see you on the next installment. Until then, enjoy the rest of your day and enjoy this awesome basketball. Take care, everybody.